Tonight on the Midnight Drive, we're finishing up our time in Hawaii. Now, every place leaves something behind. Sometimes it's obvious, like a photograph on your phone or sand still hiding in the bottom of your suitcase. But I've started wondering if the most meaningful souvenirs are the ones we never intended to bring home. A sentence, an idea, a perspective, a different way of walking through the world. This week, we've wandered across Hawaii together. We've listened to the Pacific Ocean long enough to realize it isn't peaceful, it's patient. We've stepped aside for ancient processions. We stood quietly beside searching spirits. And we learned that some of the most beautiful things in life were never ours to possess in the first place. So, before we leave the islands behind, I'd like to take one last midnight drive and ask a simple question. When the vacation ends, what do we actually carry home? I think we've misunderstood souvenirs. Not the little gift shop kind. Although, I have absolutely nothing against refrigerator magnets if that's what you're into. I'm talking about the things that quietly follow us home. The things we never planned on packing. I've noticed that every meaningful trip I've ever taken leaves behind one sentence. Not an itinerary, not a photograph. Just one idea that somehow refuses to leave. And sometimes it takes years before I realize that it's still there. I'll be washing dishes or driving to the grocery store when a place I haven't visited in a decade suddenly reappears because of a smell or a song or a certain kind of light. It's remarkable how little memory seems to care about importance. I couldn't tell you what I had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago, but I can still remember standing on a balcony in Kona just after sunrise, coffee in one hand, watching clouds drift across the Pacific Ocean, while absolutely nothing happened. No whales, no music, no spiritual awakening, just wind moving through palm trees. And somehow, that ordinary moment has stayed with me far longer than many of the things I deliberately tried to remember. Maybe that's because attention is a strange kind of glue. The moments where we're fully present have a way of sticking. I've been thinking about that all week. We started with the Pacific Ocean. I remember saying something that surprised even me. The ocean isn't peaceful, it's patient. I've been carrying around that sentence ever since we first talked about it, because patience feels different. Peace suggests stillness. Patience suggests endurance. Movement without hurry. Power that doesn't need to prove itself. The waves arrive whether anyone is watching or not. The tides continue whether we approve. The horizon remains completely uninterested in our deadlines. There's something deeply comforting about that. Maybe because so much of modern life is designed to convince us that everything depends on us. Answer the email. Refresh the page, check the notification, respond quickly, keep moving, keep producing, keep optimizing. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean has been quietly breathing against volcanic rock for millions of years. It doesn't seem particularly stressed about my schedule. That perspective alone was worth the flight. Then we wandered onto roads where stories say ancient warriors still march beneath the moonlight. Again, I found myself less interested in whether the legend was literally true than in what it quietly asked of the people listening to it. Move aside. Lower your eyes. Respect the procession. It's amazing how revolutionary humility begins to sound once you've spent enough time online. We've become so accustomed to announcing ourselves that simply stepping aside almost feels radical. Then came the Faceless Lady and the Green Lady, stories that somehow managed to become less about ghosts and more about memory, about identity, about grief, refusing to follow a schedule. I still can't stop thinking about the idea that places remember us almost as much as we remember them. Walk into an old classroom. Drive down the street where you learned to ride a bicycle. Visit a church you haven't seen in 20 years. Something happens. The building hasn't changed. You have. And suddenly, two versions of yourself occupy the same space for just a moment. That's a kind of haunting, too. By Thursday, we were talking about lava rocks and tiny builders. One story asking us to leave things where we found them. The other reminding us that the best work is often invisible. Respect, craftsmanship, stewardship. Without realizing it, those themes kept showing up like familiar landmarks on a long drive. And that's when it finally occurred to me. Maybe every place is trying to teach us something. Not through lectures, not through museums, certainly not through social media, but through attention. If we're willing to slow down enough to notice. I've wondered why certain vacations disappear almost immediately, while others quietly become part of who we are. Maybe it isn't the destination at all. Maybe it's whether we allowed ourselves to be changed while we were there. And that's harder than it sounds. Tourism is mostly consumption. See this, eat here, photograph that, buy something, move on. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a place, but enjoyment and relationship aren't quite the same thing. Relationship requires listening. Relationship changes both people involved. And maybe that's what I unexpectedly found in Hawaii. Not answers and not proof. Just a different posture. Walk slower. Look longer. Leave some things exactly where they are. Accept that mystery is not a problem waiting to be solved. Respect stories, even when certainty remains out of reach. If that's all that I carried home, it would have been enough. The lessons and perspectives that we can learn from looking and listening to the ocean alone is astounding. It's funny how the smallest souvenirs often weigh the most. Not necessarily in your carry-on bag, but the weight that you feel in your heart, in your soul. What do you make of all this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Go ahead and leave us a comment wherever you may be listening. As always, we always enjoy having you along right here with us on the midnight drive. Vacationing is wonderful, but coming home is a different kind of wonderful. It's not because I'm eager for the vacation to end. It's quite the opposite. There's something strangely beautiful about that in-between space. The suitcases are packed. The hotel room is empty. The rental car smells faintly of sunscreen and coffee. You take one last look at the ocean and quietly think to yourself, I wonder when I'll return. Airports are full of people carrying invisible luggage. You can see it if you pay attention. Families still laughing about something that happened 3 days ago. Couples are already scrolling through photographs they took 12 hours ago. Some have even started posting them on Facebook and Instagram. Someone wearing a brand new t-shirt they bought on vacation because it somehow feels wrong to wait until they get home. Everyone is carrying something, and almost none of it fits inside of a suitcase. I've started wondering if that's what travel is actually for. It's not escape. It's more like recalibration. Leaving home long enough to notice home again. It's interesting, isn't it? People spend thousands of dollars chasing extraordinary experiences. Yet some of my favorite memories from Hawaii are almost painfully ordinary. Coffee while the sun rises. Rain moving across the mountainside. The sound of geckos after dark. Watching people surf while realizing I could happily sit there for another 3 hours doing absolutely nothing. Nothing happened. And that's exactly why I remember it. I've noticed my best memories almost never announce themselves. They're very quiet. They sneak into ordinary moments, and they surprise me. Maybe that's why I love this show. Every week we start with something that sounds like folklore, ghosts, old roads, tiny builders, searching spirits. Then somewhere along the way, we accidentally end up talking about patience, or grief, or craftsmanship, or identity. And I don't think that's an accident anymore. I think stories have always been the safest way to tell the truth. Tell someone, you should slow down. They'll probably nod, and they'll forget that by lunchtime. Now, if you tell them about ancient warriors marching beneath moonlight while everyone quietly steps aside, then suddenly carrying humility around without realizing it is something that you just find yourself doing. Tell someone you can't own beauty. That's a nice sentence, isn't it? Tell them about people mailing lava rocks back across the Pacific Ocean with handwritten apologies for taking them in the first place. And now, that idea has a home. Stories don't force their way into our lives. They move in quietly. That's probably why I've stopped asking whether every legend is literally true. I'm much more interested in whether it's useful. Does it make me kinder, or more observant, or more patient? Does it encourage me to leave a place better than I found it? If the answer is yes, then I think the story has already accomplished something extraordinary. I've also been thinking about maps. Not paper maps. The invisible ones that we carry. Everybody has them. The street where they learned to drive. The bench where someone said goodbye. The restaurant where they celebrated good news. The hospital hallway where everything changed. Our lives become attached to geography in ways we rarely notice until years later. Maybe that's why certain places feel haunted. Not because something refuses to leave, because something refuses to be forgotten. And maybe that's true for joy as much as it is for grief. I hope it is. I hope somewhere years from now, I'll hear waves crashing against a shoreline and immediately remember this week on the Midnight Drive. Not because of ghost stories, because of perspectives, because I started paying attention differently. There's another realization I wasn't expecting. Respect and wonder seem to travel together. The more convinced that I become that I don't understand everything, then the more interesting the world becomes. That's a surprisingly hopeful way to live. Not cynical, not gullible, just curious. Curious enough to listen. Curious enough to ask another question. Curious enough to leave a little mystery untouched. I think that as a society, we've become very uncomfortable with unanswered questions. Every search engine promises immediate information. Every argument demands immediate certainty. Every opinion arrives polished and complete. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean keeps rolling toward shore without explaining itself. Volcanoes continue building islands, one eruption at a time. Rain falls on valleys, older than memory. And somewhere, a local quietly says, people don't stop on that road after dark. No debate. No presentation. Just a story handed from one person to another. There's wisdom in that kind of simplicity. As we leave Hawaii behind, I don't think I'm carrying ghost stories home. I'm carrying a slower heartbeat. I'm carrying the idea that respect is different than consumption. I'm carrying the image of anonymous builders creating something beautiful without waiting for applause. I'm carrying the reminders that places deserve our attention before they deserve our opinions. And maybe that's the best souvenir I've ever brought home. The older I get, the less interested I become in collecting things. I'd rather collect perspectives. They're lighter. They travel better. And unlike magnets on a refrigerator, they quietly change the way you see the world every single day. So if someone asked me, what I brought back from Hawaii, probably smile for a moment before answering. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. Sometimes I think the hardest part of traveling isn't leaving. It's returning. Literally returning home. Not to be confused with the trip home, the process of the trip home. It's literally returning and arriving at home. You unpack the suitcase, throw a load of laundry into the washing machine, open the refrigerator, check the mail. Within 24 hours, ordinary life quietly reclaims its territory. The alarm still goes off. Traffic still exists. The grocery store is still out of the one thing you actually needed. Nothing has changed, except something has. I've experienced this after almost every meaningful trip I've ever taken. The world is exactly the same, but my relationship to it feels just a little bit different. And maybe that's why I never really understood people who say they travel to escape reality. Reality comes with you. Your worries fit comfortably inside an overhead compartment. Your insecurities survive airport security. And your unanswered questions happily board the plane before you do. You can't really escape yourself. But you can return with better questions. I'm still thinking about that concierge that we talked about earlier this week. The man who came to Hawaii on vacation and simply never left. For years, I thought the remarkable part of that story was his decision. Now, I'm beginning to think the remarkable part was his attention. Maybe he noticed something the rest of us hurry past. Maybe he woke up one morning, listened to the waves outside his window, and realized he had spent most of his life rushing toward a finish line that didn't actually exist. I don't know. And you want to know what? I like not knowing. Because it lets the story keep breathing. I've started paying attention to people who move slowly. Not lazily. Deliberately. The older couple taking an evening walk without phones in their hands. The fisherman cleaning his gear long after everyone else has gone home. The cashier who makes eye contact instead of racing through the transaction. The old man sitting on a bench, doing what appears to be absolutely nothing. Maybe he's remembering. Maybe he's praying. Maybe he's simply enjoying the fact that the sun is warm. Our culture is remarkably uncomfortable with people who appear unproductive. I've had to fight that myself. just existing at home. It took me years to being comfortable with not being productive. My wife is so much better at it than I am, and it's still a challenge to me, but I'm getting better at it every day. Rarely do we imagine they're exactly where they want to be. Hawaii challenged that assumption for me. I kept discovering moments that couldn't be optimized. Watching rain move across a mountainside. Listening to waves that sounded exactly like the previous 1,000 waves. Standing on black volcanic rock while realizing the island beneath my feet was actually still being created. Nothing to accomplish, nothing to prove, just attention. I've wondered if that's why folklore survives. Let's think about it. Legends force us to linger. A ghost story told around a campfire automatically slows the conversation. People lean in. Voices get quieter. Silence suddenly becomes part of the experience. Maybe stories have always been humanity's way of protecting attention. Protecting wonder. Protecting the idea that not everything valuable can be measured. This week, we've talked about ancient warriors, searching spirits, invisible builders, and volcanic curses. But somewhere beneath every single one of those stories, I keep finding exactly the same invitation. Look longer. Listen carefully. Walk respectfully. Leave room for mystery. It sounds simple, right? But it's actually surprisingly difficult advice. We as a society are trained to consume information, not to think about it. We're conditioned to collect experiences instead of relationships. To move on before a place has a chance to change us. And maybe that's why I keep coming back to road trips. No matter how hard you try, you cannot rush a highway. You cannot fast forward a sunset. You cannot appreciate a small town by treating it like an obstacle between destinations. The journey itself quietly insists on participation. And maybe life does too. There's another thing I hope I carry home from Hawaii. The realization that wonder doesn't require certainty. I don't have to decide whether every legend is literally true to let it reshape the way I move through the world. I can step a little softer, look a little longer, speak a little quieter, respect a place without needing it to possess it. For a culture obsessed with ownership, that feels almost revolutionary. And maybe that's the real souvenir, not an object sitting on a shelf, a different posture. one that somehow makes ordinary life feel just a little more extraordinary. You're listening to The Midnight Drive. I used to think the goal of a road trip was arriving, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe the destination is just an excuse. An excuse to spend a few uninterrupted hours watching a landscape slowly become something else. Cornfields become mountains. Mountains become desert. Desert becomes coastline. The world doesn't usually change all at once. It changes 1 mile at a time. Maybe people do too. I've been thinking about that while packing to leave Hawaii. Not literally. That suitcase has been unpacked for years. But every time I revisit these islands through their stories, I notice something I somehow missed before. The Pacific Ocean taught me patience. The night marchers taught me respect. The Green Lady reminded me that love doesn't always know where to go. The Faceless Lady made me wonder how much of who we are exists in the way we recognize one another. Pele quietly asked whether beautiful things are meant to be owned. The Menehune reminded me that invisible craftsmanship still shapes the world every single day. And somewhere in the middle of all those stories, I stopped thinking about ghosts and I started thinking about people. About the strange little rituals we invent to make sense of uncertainty. The stories that society hands to the next generation. The roads we instinctively slow down on. The beaches where conversations somehow become more honest. I've noticed something while making this show. Every location begins as geography. And then it slowly becomes autobiography. You start reading about an island and somehow end up asking yourself why you're always in such a hurry. You start researching folklore and suddenly you're thinking about your grandparents. You stare at the ocean long enough and realize you've been measuring your life by productivity instead of presence. Places have an interesting way of introducing us to ourselves. Maybe that's why certain vacations stay with us. Not because we successfully escaped ordinary life, but because ordinary life looked different when we returned home. I think that's the real miracle of travel. It's not transformation, it's calibration. A small adjustment. Just enough to notice that the coffee tastes better when you aren't checking your phone. That the drive to work becomes so much more interesting if the windows are down. That your neighborhood has birds you've somehow ignored for years. That sunsets happen whether or not you stop to watch them. the world is constantly offering quiet gifts. Most of them don't fit inside a souvenir shop. There's another realization I've been carrying this week. Respect and wonder seem to be very close friends. The moment that I stop trying to own a place, explain a place, conquer a place, or solve a place, I finally begin experiencing it. Maybe that's true for people too. Maybe relationships become richer when we stop trying to win every conversation. Maybe faith becomes deeper when certainty loosens its grip. Maybe mystery isn't an obstacle at all. Maybe it's an invitation. I realize that's an unusual conclusion for a week about paranormal folklore. I'm supposed to tell you whether I believe in ghosts, whether ancient warriors still walk the Hawaiian roads, whether tiny builders still hide in the valleys, whether spirits wander beneath banyan trees searching for someone they've lost. Honestly, I don't know. I really don't. But I do know this. Stories have changed the way I move through the world. I walk a little bit slower. I look a little bit longer. I leave rocks where I found them. I pay attention to old roads. I try to respect places before I understand them. If that's all folklore ever accomplishes, then I sincerely think that's enough. One of my favorite moments from this week happened without a microphone. I found myself remembering something I said almost by accident. I've brought it up several times. The ocean isn't peaceful, it's patient. It makes me smile when that notion comes back to me, because somewhere along the way that stopped being an observation about Hawaii. It quietly became an aspiration. I want to become a little more patient, a little less frantic, a little more willing to let life arrive in its own time instead of constantly trying to outrun it. It's weird how a place can leave you with something you didn't know that you needed. And maybe that's what we carry home. Not proof, not certainty, not even answers. Just better questions. A different posture. A quieter heartbeat. And a handful of stories that somehow make ordinary roads feel just a little more mysterious. Next week, we'll park the car and we'll talk about something unrelated to a location. But the week after that, we'll point towards another destination, another collection of legends, another landscape waiting to be noticed. But tonight, I'd like to leave Hawaii exactly the way we found it. Still surrounded by the patient Pacific, still filled with stories, still becoming itself one wave at a time. And maybe, if we're paying attention, so are we.